Okay, you're on.
Morning, everyone. Since today is Lag BaOmer, so I'm going to talk to you about Lag BaOmer. It's really one of the great mysteries in Jewish tradition as to the origin and reason for the 33rd day of the Omer being a semi-holiday, or at least a day of commemoration. The original mention of it is in the Talmud regarding the students of Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara says that he had 12,000 pairs of students, and that all of them died in the period between Pesach and Lag BaOmer. And Lag BaOmer is when they no longer died. But the Gemara itself does not say what the cause of death was. Most of the Gemara says a spiritual cause. Shalom no'agu kovov zeh b'zeh. Because they were not tolerant of each other. One of the ironies of life is that people of faith usually are the most intolerant, because I have such a strong belief in what I see to be true that I resent that others don't see it that way, that others have a divergent view, so to speak. So therefore, I'm intolerant of that. So that not only applies in differences, basic differences in faith and religion, but that's true within one faith through itself. And therefore, here you had 24,000 students, all of whom had somewhat the same education and the same outlook on life, and they were intolerant one of another because of the fact that they believed strongly in what they held to be truth. So that's a very fine line, very difficult to navigate. On one hand, to be a true member of the faith, and to believe in its practices and opinions. And on the other hand, somehow to be tolerant of those that may have a different view, many times a view that's opposite to ours. And we see in human history over all of the ages how difficult this conundrum is, and that many times, if not most times, great wars are fought on the basic ideas of religion and faith. So the Gemara gives us a reason why in heaven they, so to speak, justified the death of so many good people. But it doesn't say how they died or at whose hands So the traditional prevailing view is that it was a plague, a pandemic, and that it swept through the halls of the study of the students of Rabbi Akiva, and this plague consumed them. And that only on the 33rd day of the Omer, after some died in the morning, the plague somehow ran its course. It abated. And after that, the plague disappeared. That's what the Gemara tells us. And as I mentioned, most of the traditional commentators attributed the plague to what today we would say a virus or a bacteria, or somehow how the way plagues are transmitted, God forbid. However, there is another opinion. You have to remember there always is another opinion. It's emphasized by Rabbi Avraham Dowd in Spain in the 11th and 12th centuries. And he said that the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva were really the soldiers of Bar Kokhba. That's another one of the great mysterious figures in Jewish history. Shimon Bar Kokhba. Now, after the destruction of the temple in the year 70, the temple building itself, its ruins were not disturbed. And the outer courtyard was, so to speak, preserved. And after a period of time, say 15, 20 years, Jews began to come to the temple, the ruins of the temple, and pray. Now, the Romans had an ambivalent policy towards the Jews. On one hand, they felt that the Jews would be a positive force in Roman society, and that they were not to be destroyed or subjugated. And they allowed, for instance, the ransom of the Jewish captives from the destruction of the Second Temple. So you had tens of thousands of Jews that were slaves, and they were ransomed by their Jewish brethren throughout the Roman Empire. On the other hand, that they realized that the Jews were a pill that they couldn't swallow, because Judaism has within it not only a universal faith, but it has an individual nationalistic goal. The Jewish people as a people, the land of Israel as a nation, an exclusivity regarding the Jews in the land of Israel. And the Romans felt that that was very dangerous. And they were not wrong in that assumption, because as long as the Jews felt that their loyalty was to Jerusalem and not to Rome. The Romans felt that they were subversive. They were a part of society that did not assimilate. We see that always also in the Megillah of Esther, where Haman says that. There's a people, he said, that are scattered, but they're not part of the society. He refused to be assimilated into Persian society. And therefore they remain a danger. Especially because they're talented and strong and vital. So the Romans, hundreds of years later, are faced with the same problem. The Roman Empire was built by captive nations, most of whom, in one way or another, assimilated into the Roman Empire and into Roman ways. But the Jews were a strong percentage of the Roman Empire. It's estimated that there were 10% of the Roman Empire was Jewish. And these Jews did not assimilate easily. And therefore the Roman emperors always felt that they were a danger. So in about the 130, the Emperor Hadrian rises to the throne. He becomes the Emperor of Rome. And at first, his attitude towards the Jews is more or less benign, benevolent. He allows the Jews to come to resettle in Jerusalem. He allows them to come and pray on the Temple Mount. There even is a series of negotiations between the Jews and Hadrian to allow the Jews to rebuild the temple. Would be under Roman auspices, would be part of the Roman world. The Romans were very strange. They were very tolerant of other religions. That was part of the idea of paganism, is that if you had 100 gods, there could be 101 too. And they couldn't understand how the Jews would fit into that paradigm. But originally their persecution of the Jews was nationalistic and not religious. All of this changed when Hadrian changed his mind. And instead of adopting a benevolent attitude towards the Jews, he became frightened of them. They were too numerous. They were too influential. And they were too nationalistic. So now he attempted to snuff out the Jewish community in the land of Israel, the community that still remained. And that brought about a reaction. And there were a group of very strong Jews, led by this person, Shimon Bar Kokhba, that formed an army and fought the Romans to drive them out of the land of Israel. And they conducted a war that lasted almost 5 years. For the first few years, they were successful. The Romans were driven out of Jerusalem. And Bar Kokhba renamed himself Bar Kokhba, and he had messianic pretensions. He was such a charismatic figure that Rabbi Akiva believed in him. The first of a long line of bitter disappointments in the Jewish world. But Rabbi Akiva believed that he had the makings of the Messiah and that his war would be successful. And for a number of years it was. But the Roman Empire was built upon the domino theory, that if one piece of it fell, all of it would eventually fall. And therefore the Romans fought constant wars against all different tribes all over Europe and Asia to prevent any territory whatsoever becoming independent of Rome. And this brought the Romans to concentrate their army in Judea against Bar Kokhba. And the situation soon reversed itself. The Romans had overwhelming power. Now, Rabbi Akiva believed in Bar Kokhba, but many of the other great rabbis did not. There's a famous bitter statement of Rabbi Tarfon to Rabbi Akiva. Akiva, Esev Yale Melachoyecha. Rabbi Akiva, a grass will grow from your cheekbones. Vein Mashiach ben David bo. The Mashiach will not have come yet. So here we have a problem that reflects itself throughout Jewish history. How do you identify the Mashiach? How will we know? What is he supposed to do? What's supposed to happen? Another one of the great issues that is shrouded in mystery. But in any event, the Romans prevailed. So Rabbi Avraham Ibn Daud said that the 24,000 students that died that the Talmud references us to, these students of Rabbi Akiva, they were the army of Bar Kokhba. And that the Romans mounted a campaign, this 33-day campaign, that destroyed them. And then the Romans embarked on a purge amongst all of those that supported the idea Bar Kokhba, and they realized that many of the rabbis and that the teaching of Torah itself was the cause of Jewish nationalism. So they tried to execute the great rabbis, and we have the legend about the great rabbis being murdered, tortured to death, all of which was meant to end the idea that the Jews would somehow come back to the land of Israel and be an independent nation. So therefore, this is what the Sfirat Omer represents. I mean, that's what the days of the Omer represent, this 33-day battle in which Jewish independence was destroyed. And that's why it became a time of mourning, a time of sadness, and layered into it all of the customs that we have today about cutting the hair and weddings, etc., etc. So Lag BaOmer also brings the customs of Lag BaOmer bring memories, and the memories are all from Second Temple times. The custom of bonfires that the Talmud tells us that in order for the Jews in Iraq to know when the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem had declared the new moon, so they had a system of bonfires from 10 high places between Jerusalem and Iraq, and they would light the bonfires in this series so everyone would know that the new moon was declared. And if you knew that, so then you knew when the holidays would fall. The Jewish calendar would be established. The Gemara says that the Tzdokim, the Sadducees who did not follow the rabbis, sabotaged this method. Find that throughout Jewish history that a great deal of the sabotage of the Jews is done from inside as well as from outside. And therefore, they had to abolish this system of fires, and eventually it led to what we have today, a permanent calendar based upon mathematical and astronomical calculations. And the calendar is not perfect. It's off a very small amount, but it's perfect enough for us to deal with it. And it's based on the fact that every 19 years, the secular date and the Hebrew date coincide. The sun and the moon are in the same position that they were then, 19 years ago. And within that, you can calculate. So we calculate there are 7 of the 19 years are what we call leap years. They have an extra month, 13 months. Within the years themselves, there are adjustments. Sometimes the month of Kislev is 30 days, sometimes it's 29 days. So the permanent calendar plays with that. And it makes whatever adjustments it can. So the bonfire is a reminder of Second Temple times. Because all of the decisors of Israel discussed how is it permissible to make a bonfire for no purpose. You're destroying material that otherwise somehow can be used. So the purpose is a reminder of the Second Temple times. Back in the memory bank of the Jewish people, the bonfires remind us. And even though the individual Jew may not know what he's doing, but collectively speaking, this is what keeps the Jewish people going. So also there was a custom, I remember the custom as a child yet, that Jewish children would take a bow and arrow and go target practice. And that was a reminder to Bar Kokhba. Because otherwise it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But that was a reminder of the rebellion of Bar Kokhba. And interestingly enough, Bar Kokhba remains a very mysterious figure. In one respect, the Talmud represents him very negatively, and that eventually his ego destroyed him. On the other hand, they did great things, and if Rabbi Akiva considered him to be messianic material, he must have been a special human being. So all of this was layered into Lag BaOmer. All of these memories. And throughout the ages, the Omer had very difficult times for the Jewish people. During Crusade times, later on in 1648 and 1649, the rebellion of Khmelnytsky in the Ukraine and in Lithuania, terrible pogroms. So Lag BaOmer became a symbol of hope that somehow the plague would end. It was not permanent. And that it led to better things. The better things being naturally the holiday of Shavuot and the granting of the Torah to the Jewish people and our spiritual fulfillment. The Jewish people love to layer in other things. So our ancestors did not have radios or telephones or the internet. And they didn't listen to music as a recreation. But as civilization turned more to music, as it is today, where there is constant music, so the Jewish people layered in music as one of the things that we don't do during the first 33 days of the Omer, because it's a question of mourning. It's interesting in biblical times, music was part of the mourning process. So it's a civilization thing. And many of the customs that we have. So then they layered into it not to buy new clothing and not to eat new fruits and all sorts of things. All of which is to build the memory bank. And because without that memory bank, the Jewish people cannot exist. So just as in life, we oftentimes remember things, but we don't know what we're remembering. So too here, the Lag BaOmer is a memory bank for us, even if we're not always aware of what memories lie there and why it's so important for us to remember them. So have a happy Lag BaOmer and look forward to Shavuos, God willing.
Amen.
Shabbat Shalom.